Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
I remember when I first started into the private practice of law, just a quick recap. I have a law degree, I have an MBA from Ohio State, started my career in public accounting as a tax consultant, and did that for 6.5 years, and then decided to go into the private practice of law. Lots of reasons, neither here nor there. But when I went into the private practice of law, I really wanted to kind of get into business law. I had an MBA, I had a law degree, I had a CPA, I was a numbers person, really kind of interested in business and entrepreneurship and that. But when you start a practice, unless you really hit the ground running, and I didn't, because I worked in a firm where they were very large clients and I wasn't going to take any clients with me. One of my clients I worked on was Wendy's International. They weren't going to come with me. They were dealing with what's now PricewaterhouseCoopers, and anyhow, neither here nor there. So when you start out, it's like, okay, you're taking all sorts of stuff, and generally things you don't necessarily want to be taking on. Things I would, if I were an attorney now, I'd be like, no, I have no interest. But when you're starting out and trying to pay the bills, you take on whatever. And I remember taking on a particular case. It was actually referred to me by the Bar Association, had a referral service. And it was a situation where, I don't want to get too much into it, but it was a personal injury situation. Let me just say that, right? I don't need to get into the details. Somebody had been injured, felt they were wronged by another party. It was not a medical situation, but they were cut pretty badly through what they claim was somebody else's negligence. And so they reached out to the Bar Association, who put them in contact with me, and started down this path of trying to help them, go up against this particular what would be defendant in the case. And but I rather quickly realized that, I'm in over my head. And I'm racing around trying to support my client, because that's what you do as an attorney, trying to get this stuff and get medical records and get information on, related to the defendant, and running around, like this is my situation. I'm going to be Perry Mason. I'm going to represent these people. And I remember, again, being a little over my head and talking to a friend, and he said, here, I'm going to connect you with another personal injury attorney, just so you can get some help. And you know what? You're better off getting 50% of something than 100% of nothing, right? I was gonna mess it all up. And ultimately, it doesn't really matter to this discussion, but ultimately I just turned the whole thing over to this particular attorney, because I was just getting so busy with my business stuff at one point. And a lot of times these personal injury type things, they just drag on for years. You have 2 years to file them. I guess depends on the state, but you have generally 2 years to file before the statute of limitations runs out. But once it files, it can just languish on forever, and it was. And in a personal injury situation, you're not getting paid until there's ultimately a settlement. So neither here nor there. But the point I'm trying to make is, when I first met with this particular attorney, he kind of set me straight right from the get-go, because I'm going through all my stuff. I'm, here I've got this, and I've got this, and we got this, and here's evidence, and this is, we're going to take him down, and he could see all the work I'd been putting in, and really it was work that other people should have been doing, or you could just do in simple discovery. It's a legal term. But he just said, in a very empathetic way, he says, the first thing you need to understand with respect to this is that this is not your problem. This is not your problem. This is not, this is not your case necessarily. This is not your situation. Basically telling me you cannot take this personally. You have a job to do. You're a glorified plumber. You're going to go in and you're going to plunge the toilet, and no judgment, no anything. You're just going to, and it was, to me, it was kind of a jolt in the face. Like, oh, really? Shouldn't we just, he's like, you just will burn yourself out if you do that. If you just take on every case like it's life or death. Um, and that stuck with me. And I was recently reminded of that. I was reading a study, um, research by this particular researcher. Her name, I'm going to butcher this. Um, Grit Hain is her name. She's a professor of translational social neuroscience. And her research focuses on social motives, empathy, reciprocity, collectivism, us working together. Um, and that those things and their impact on actual behavior. She's a professor at the University of Würzburg, which is in Germany. Hence the struggle with her name. And I did spend some time trying to figure it out. But she has done some work, and I've talked about generosity being contagious on this program a number of times. Likewise, with respect to our empathy, it can be contagious. And what she has found in her research, and what they did was they took people, and they showed them images of somebody receiving an electric shock. And I don't know how that would fly in the United States, but what they would do is they would shock the hand of somebody, show them a video of a person shocking another person's hand, and then they would either seed, the person who saw the video, the subject, if you will, they would seed that person's response as to how they felt about it by indicating that, well, somebody else who saw this was empathetic towards the person or not moved at all by that. And people's empathy changed based upon what they were nudged towards feeling. And what she talks about in the study is that we can be nudged, we can be persuaded to be empathetic or not empathetic, and it changes. Or you can say, well, I'm empathetic, I'm always empathetic, and the answer to that is well, you're really not. It depends on the day. She talks in the study about, you walk by a homeless person and you might offer help, and then next day walk by 10 and do nothing. And a lot of it's just going to depend upon certainly mood and other things that we're primed for or nudged for. So if you see other people being empathetic, then you're certainly going to be empathetic. Or if you see people being unempathetic, you're going to do the same. And what she's getting at is that, we can kind of push people in one direction or another, which certainly can be useful if you stop and think about it. There are times where people need to be somewhat empathetic. Now, I don't totally agree with the attorney that I'd met with, but I think there was a kernel of truth in there, in that I was spending a whole lot of time, and I was not going to make this thing go any faster than it was going to go. I was not going to change the outcome of what was going to happen. As an attorney, I was mainly going to guide it through, showing them how to guide themselves through and get money for their injury. Generally would involve insurance. It's just going to move slow and just the way it is. And there are fixed schedules, and there's not this smoking gun that all of a sudden they're going to get, $20 million for this. It was a bad cut. There was just there was a limit. And so I needed to temper my empathy for my client. But there are situations too where you need to go the other direction. You can't be an attorney or, lots of different professions and have no empathy. Certainly a doctor can't have no empathy, or a nurse can't have no empathy, but they can't have too much empathy either. And so, we can essentially help regulate ourselves and certainly regulate others depending upon what the situation warrants. And it's the talk about social workers, and social workers have the propensity to burn out. They absolutely will burn out if they keep that high level of empathy. And sitting where you're sitting, you might be like, "Oh, come on, Frank. They got to give it their all." It's like, well, yeah, you need to be empathetic, but it's like running a race. You can sprint 100 yards, you can't sprint a marathon. And being a social worker, or some sort of profession where it's a high touch, caring profession, it's a marathon. It's day after day. If you're the construction worker and you come across an accident or someone who's in dire need, then your empathy can be on a sprint. I need to fly into action, and you need to really help this person. Need to do all I can, knowing that, you're going to go back to the construction site or working in the grocery store or being an accountant or whatever it is. And so the point to the research, Professor Hain, the point to her research and just our lesson for today is that we do have the ability to regulate our empathy. We have the ability to regulate the empathy of people around us. We as humans all adopt certain social norms, and we see what other people are doing, and they kind of follow suit, and we see what they're doing, and we're going to kind of follow what they're doing. So just stop and think about your situation, whatever situations you've had. The types of business you're in, and what level of empathy is needed. Do you need to raise it? Do you need to lower it? Do you see other people that you work with that need to regulate their level of empathy, and know that you have more control than you think in determining the level of empathy that you bring to certainly your relationships. We're not dealing. Empathy is just not for strangers, but our relationships, our co-workers, the people who work for us, our vendors, our networking partners. To what degree do we need to be bringing empathy to the situation, or maybe peeling back on the empathy depending upon what's warranted.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AMSPIRIT.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.